One of the things that has always been hard about following Jesus is the ways that he calls us to things we don't want to see for ourselves. And I don't just mean hardships. I think sometimes we can go into a hardship with a sense of purpose. Jesus is calling me to this and through this, and I can get through it. What I actually mean is the way that he calls us to change, to become something that we don't necessarily want to be, something like meek. And so very often what we try to do is massage the meanings of these things Jesus calls us to reflect more, perhaps the sensibilities of how we want to see ourselves.
Blessed are the poor and the mournful, the meek and the persecuted. In what world is that actually true, Jesus? And so, as often happens when confronted with data that doesn't fit our expectations, I think we subtly endeavor to make it fit. We massage the message so that our assumptions about the world can remain intact. For example, I have a commentary in my office right now that tried to explain to me that meek meant strength under control. That's why they'll inherit the earth. When Jesus says the meek will inherit the earth, what he really means is that the powerful will inherit the earth, but only those who know when and where to use all of that power. And that certainly fits a lot better, at least in my world, except it's also clearly not what meek means. At least not in English anyway. Meek means submissive or easily imposed upon. That's what my dictionary said. Now, maybe the problem is meek is just not a good English word. It's a bad translation, except the Greek word here is praus, and it doesn't mean strength either. It means, I'll quote, not overly impressive, humbled. In fact, the Hebrew equivalent is the word anah, and that comes from a root that means bowed down and cowering. In other words, there is nothing in the word meek, whether you read it in English or Greek or Hebrew, that should give you the image of coiled strength just waiting to be let loose on the world. The only reason to read it that way is to make Jesus make sense in the world we're already familiar with. Except, what if that's not the point? What if Jesus isn't trying to make sense in our world? What if he's not even really talking to us in this moment at all? See, I think we tend to read this, actually tend to read everything through modern Western assumptions about the world. But if you're a Jewish person in the first century, particularly a poor rural Jewish person standing in the audience, you would probably hear this differently. In fact, you might hear a callback to a song that you know from your childhood. A song that we call Psalm 37, a song which sings about the fall of Israel and the apparent victory of the ruthless. A psalm which then declares that eventually the righteous will inherit the earth because the Lord will not leave anyone in the power of the wicked. A psalm which ends with the line, salvation comes from the Lord because the Lord helps and delivers. God delivers those who overcome. No, that's not what it says. It says God delivers those who have to seek refuge. The meek are not the powerful under control. We might want to see ourselves here. The meek are those who've been crushed, put down, those who've been humbled and forced to bow, those who've had their land, their earth, their everything taken away from them by the more powerful. Listen, you don't want to be meek, not in this context. Because the meek are those who've been forced to watch the world divvied up in front of them by those who are more powerful, more beautiful, more wealthy, more well-connected, more strategic, more everything. And they know they don't have the power to fight back. That's the meek. So, if you're a Roman person from the Decapolis, shoulder to shoulder with a Jewish person from Jerusalem, standing on lands that have been taken from them by your government, listening to Jesus from Galilee talk about inheritance, probably an awkward moment. The point isn't something that you should aspire to be. The point is that one day all things will be made right. And I know we have the sense, I do anyway, almost every level of our lives that the world is being handed out, and those who have the courage and the strength to get theirs will get it, and those who don't won't. And yet here Jesus seems to say to that, I know it seems that way, but do you imagine that that is what God dreams of? Or is there something different? See, I think we instinctively want to assume there's a reason that the meek will get the earth. Something that we can aspire to, something that we can be so that we will get the earth too. But what if Jesus is saying, look, your imagination of who deserves what, that's part of the problem to begin with. Said another way, I think the Beatitudes aren't a checklist telling us what to do to earn God's favor. The Beatitudes are a reframing of who already has God's attention. And once we get a glimpse of that, once we see what Jesus is doing in these lines, that he's not explaining our world to us, he's declaring a new world among us, well, then all of a sudden this opening salvo, all of these beatitudes, these declarations of how the world could be if we would let it, they stop needing to be sensible and they start to become aspirational. If this is what God is really like, what could we be like if we could aspire to see those who mourn comforted? Or the merciful shown mercy, what would we be like if the peacemakers among us, they were the ones held up as the children of God? What if we could believe that those who hunger and thirst for the things of God won't just search in vain for lives on end, but instead they will actually find themselves one day wrapped up in the arms of the one who loves them, full of every good thing they need? What if all this isn't just pretty poetry to get the sermon rolling, but it's language intended to shape the things that we teach ourselves to dream about?